Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're sitting down and talking with John Halcyon, a member of the Burning Man community, leader of Hug Nation, and someone I deeply admire. I asked John to join us today because they've spoken openly about their experience with polyamory, and because they have been dropping in on some of their Zoom calls here during the plague, and was deeply impressed with this individual, especially around vulnerability, and saying that about a man who is older than me is not something I often get to say. So, John, I'm deeply grateful that we were able to connect and we're able to have this conversation today.
Oh, me too. I'm so glad you reached out, and I've already enjoyed getting to know you, and I look forward to continuing.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start you with one of the questions I've asked many of our speakers throughout this event, and that is, in your experience, what is the most potent, life-giving, joyful gift that comes from this relationship style, from polyamory?
Well, I'd love to answer that with a little story, which is I went to the National Lifestyle Convention in Reno, Nevada, about 20 years ago, and did not know much about polyamory, didn't know about open relationships, and was invited to speak there about how to use webcams to have more like open swinging experiences through the internet. And I sat in on some panels, and before the panels, they would have people go around the room and introduce themselves. And couple by couple, they would because it's couples only in that scenario. And the first guy says, I'm Joe, and this is Cindy, and Cindy likes women, and so we'll meet other women, and I will generally watch. Occasionally, they'll let me experience them physically, but usually I just watch, and I appreciate them, and I'm happy for them. And the next couple said, I'm Jared, and this is Lonnie. Lonnie likes gangbangs. So we put out ads in local swingers magazines, and we have 9 or 10 guys come to the house, and we all have sex with my wife. They can come on her chest, and they can come on her face, but they just can't kiss her. That's like my line. And I'm a little naive at this point, and I'm hearing these things. I'm going like, wow. And then the next couple is the one that changed things for me. The next couple, they're older, probably early 60s, maybe late 50s, which now, as I'm 50, is like not as much older as it was when I was 20 years ago. But the guy said, I'm Bob, and this is Lucille, and I love Lucille more than anything in the world. I would swim the longest ocean. I would climb the highest mountain to get her a rare fruit if that's what she desired. I would give her anything that I could. And the one thing that I can't give her is that excited, tingly feeling of a new lover. So that is what I do. And I got chills just seeing it right now. Like, I was like, holy shit, this is the most romantic thing I've ever heard a human being saying. And he's talking about letting other people have sex with his wife. And boom. And that, I think, goes to what I think is the gift of polyamory is that shifting to that place of like, your joy can give me joy. And is like such a different dynamic than ownership or all the stuff that I was raised to believe are the defaults of a relationship. So, and that's it for me.
As you were sharing that story, I got chills. I think partially because some of the permission giving that was present in the first 2 introductions was making my skin crawl a little. I think the notion of possession as an element of love is one of the aspects that our mononormative culture really cultivates in some ways, and I'm not sure why at this point.
There's a lot of I was fascinated by the lifestyle community because there, in some aspects, there are these very like cutting edge, outside of the norms types uh, behaviors and very openness, and then some areas very rigid and very like men and men was an absolute no-no. Bisexual man was not an acceptable thing, and there's a number of things where there was so I mean, I learned a lot from meeting people in that world, but it definitely did not have the same uh, spiritual or emotional kind of landscape or classroom as I think other types of non-traditional relationships can have.
Yeah, that matches my experience with the swinger or the lifestyle community as well. It's an interesting blend of openness and rigidity. For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So I'm curious how you moved from naive 30-year-old with an exploding head into practicing a more open polyamorous relationship style yourself.
Well, I had a very about that time I was discovering the internet and Burning Man, these two cultures where there was this the default world that I'd been exposed to was so much more restricted than both of those worlds. Like I sometimes say, like I thought that my choices were like a freeway, and I could pick which lane I want to get into, and I could pick, like, as far as my lifestyle, I could be a white collar businessman, I could be a blue collar worker, I could be a stay-at-home dad. Those are like my choices. And then I went to Burning Man, and it's like, whoa, this isn't a freeway where you pick a lane, it's a lake. You can go and you meet people, they're doing so many different things. And so, like, when I met Bob and Lucille, I'm like, whoa, I now have an example of something that is totally outside of the lanes that I thought were my choices. I'm like, whoa, if that is something that works for somebody, then I gotta like let go of all these things of what I think that I have to and I'm supposed to do. And so then and through those communities, I started to meet people and had partners that were already more experienced with me with open relationship, and so they guided me in that direction.
Since you brought up Burning Man, I think it might be a good moment to do a quick overview for the audience members who might have the slightest glimmer of an idea of what Burning Man is.
I love trying to explain Burning Man because it's impossible. But it's kind of like, it's like explaining the Grand Canyon to someone. You could, of course you could explain it, but it's not the same as if you go to it. With that being said, Burning Man is a temporary city in the Nevada desert where now upwards of 75,000 people come together for a single week and create. Everyone they live according to 10 principles that guide the society, but there's no one who runs it. There are people that set up a structure of a city structure and porta potties and emergency services, and then everything is filled in by the people there that are trying to make the city better. That you go and you go, what is the city missing? And then you bring it. And so what has happened over the 30 years or so that it's been going is it becomes this mecca for cutting edge expression in science, in art, in chemistry, in like the most amazing edge exploration in almost anything that's happening on the planet comes together to just to show off and experiment and try what they are going to be. So what that looks like, it looks like people coming together in theme camps that have like there are people who'd be performances, and there'll be people doing circus acts, and there'll be people who do performances of dance, and there'll be music. Some people have an expectation, or they hear about it, they think, oh, it's like a rave and music, a music festival. Well, it's like a city where people throw music festivals on the edges of it, multiple music festivals on the edges of it. And then, but in the city, there's also a place where there's yoga, every day. And there's actually probably 50 places where there's 100 places where there's yoga every day. And there's science lectures every day. And it's like anything. And the cool thing is it's a duocracy. So if you go there and you go like, oh man, there should be more bluegrass music. Well, guess what? Next year, you should bring more bluegrass music. And that vibe of everybody adding to it and creating to it is something that is magical. And then the 10 principles have, there's things like leave no trace. civic responsibility, radical self-expression, radical self-reliance. There's also no money there. It's decommodification. So you're even encouraged to cover up the logos like on a rental truck to try to really give people this experience of no commodification, no transactional living. And it's based on another principle, which is gifting. So there's a gift economy. And as you can tell, I can start to get on a roll when I talk about Burning Man, but the gifting to me is the principle that radically changed my life. And it's kind of like the magic sauce for why the city grows and hums at this community way.
So I'm going to throw in my perspective of Burning Man, because my world is a little different than yours. Because I've been to 18 burns. I've only been to the desert once. My Burning Man experience is made up almost entirely of regional Burning Man events here in the eastern half of the country that range in size from 100 to a few hundred to a few thousand people, but are also running off of the 10 principles and are also seeking to create that same cauldron of cutting edge experimentation, radical self-expression, and community around all of those aspects. And for me, I think the best way I can put together what it feels like is Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's all rolled into one holiday with the family that you chose. Because people are in costumes, people are expressing gratitude, people are giving gifts, people are thinking about who they are and what they want out of life and setting new resolutions for who they might be going forward. And so it's a lot of magic crammed into one tiny space. And it's really, I think, difficult to convey to someone who's never been there the degree of permission that you feel.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you corrected me on that. I described Black Rock City, which is the original Burning Man gathering. But yeah, it is a community and a global movement with expressions ranged in regionals all over the world. So thank you for clarifying that. The other thing that I embarrassed to have not is the art is a huge aspect of it. People, the city is based around people contributing their art, those gifts that people give of how to make the city better. The kind of core of it, as it began, is people bring these big pieces of art out to the desert. Now as people bring art to wherever they gather, and that art, sometimes it is massive sculptures, sometimes it is an improv performance, it is everything. And I think that's one of the huge gifts of Burning Man, is that it encourages you to see yourself as an artist and to see, like, what are the gifts that you have to give. And so you can go, oh, I'm a puppeteer, I can't wait to give a performance when I get there. Or you can show up and go, wow, look at all of this inspiring stuff. I would like to join in that, and start to like feel and like these kind of atrophied muscles, and you start to kind of get flexed and you build strength. And because of that permission that you talked about, because it is so supportive, it is a rare opportunity to kind of go to that scary space and that vulnerable space of kind of personal and expression that in the default world is so often shunned.
So you were talking about gifting, and that is definitely a principle I want to circle back to. But for me, the most challenging principle when I started burning back in 2014 was radical self-expression. Because I've grown up in a religious family, a conservative family, in the middle of a red state called Indiana. And it's not a place where being weird or unusual or visible feels safe or feels welcome. You get along by being nice and making sure you don't disturb anyone's comfort zone. And then when you throw on top of that the fact that I'm a bit of an introvert and most of my strengths aren't performance oriented, aren't physical art oriented necessarily, I felt really stuck. This radical self-expression piece felt ridiculously hard for me. And especially when I went out to the desert itself in 2016, I was like freaking out about how am I going to show up in the desert and be radically self-expressive in this massive city that's about as big as the city I live in. And I realized that my superpower was gratitude, was my ability to really see and appreciate someone's effort and someone's heart and someone's expression. And so when I was at Burning Man, everything that really deeply struck me, I stopped and I hunted down somebody. I would walk in and I'd be like, I need to talk to a camp lead. I need to talk to the artist who did this amazing thing out here. And I would keep going until I found someone who was connected to whatever thing I had so enjoyed, and just take a moment to share my enjoyment and share my gratitude. And it was amazing how much that helped connect me to the city, how much that helped me feel at home. And then as time moved forward, how within my smaller burn community, Mosaic Experiment, which is about 350 or 400 people gathered at a time, it gave me the courage to be radically self-expressive with my emotions and to grow into a community leader, a community organizer, as an expression of myself. Because I care about people and I care about people's welfare deeply. And I want everyone to have a really good time and enjoy a riotous party. And I also want people to feel comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah.
And so I created a theme camp called Slaughter's Bloody Bar, where we celebrate the bloody time of the month and we sling Bloody Marys every morning. And it's become an introvert sanctuary, is its secondary nickname. And we sit around all the time and we debate the principles and we talk about what it is to be a good person. And we talk about polyamory and we talk about the challenges of our life together. And that is where my radical self-expression took me. So I would love to hear about where gifting took you.
Well, can I touch a little bit more on riff on radical self-expression? Because I
Sure.
love that, you know, there's a misperception that radical self-expression means uber flamboyant or something like that, you know, and radical self-expression really just means radically, authentically you. Like you have permission to be as radical as you are. And sometimes, you know, in our culture, being radical can be, you know, a very base human, you know, a very expressive human being. And I think that the ability to be, you know, yourself is what the radical self-expression is about. And that it takes sometimes like that kind of, when you seeing people being super extreme in all different directions, it kind of takes some of that pressure away. Like when you see people like hanging from meat hooks, you know, and dressing in a crazy way, you're like, oh, I'm not going to be the craziest person here, you know?
Right.
And the other thing that is I think the community is very astute at sniffing out if people are not being authentic. Like if you're being weird for weird's sake, you know, or you're trying to be like, you know, it's like, you know, it's just not, no one's impressed by that, you know. Right. And if you're trying to be cool, like, it's pretty clear that but what is valued and celebrated there is this radical authenticity. So the expression that you do, whatever you do, if it's your true expression, then we're going to celebrate and we're going to clap, you know.
Right.
And right. That is, you know, rather than good art or, you know, whatever, it's truest. And I think so when the radicalness becomes truest, which is what you found, you're like, oh, this is that part of me that wants to vibrate loudly, and that becomes your art. I think it's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, gifting. Sorry. So, so the gifting took me a while to get, because the first time you hear gift as a gift economy, a lot of people, I thought, oh, it's like barter. You know, we're gonna no money, so we exchange things. Like, oh, I'll give you, you know, this necklace for, you know, a shot of tequila or whatever. Mm-hmm. But bartering is still transactional. It is still, you know, a value of one and a value of one, plus one minus one. The ledger is zero, equals zero. Okay. And the gifting that does not have that. It is, I want to give this to you because I want to make you happier. Mm-hmm. So plus one, you get the thing, and then I see you happy, plus one, that makes me happier. So now you have plus one. And it's like Christmas morning. You know, like when you give a gift to a kid and you see them light up and it makes you so happy that you got them a gift that makes them that happy, plus one. And so when you have 70,000 people all trying to make other people happy, it is incredible. And it totally changes the way that you see the world. If you really start to get, and I think this is one of the magic of Burning Man, is that it kind of tricks you into recognizing that you can get joy from others' joy. Mm-hmm. And so it can snap you out of, at least while you're there, and hopefully for much longer, that trap of thinking that the way to get yourself happier is by acquisition, by like getting stuff, getting titles, getting prestige, getting toys, getting wealth, getting, the reality is I would guess most people listening to this right now are living at a state of abundance that is just like top percentage compared to, the world in history. And yet we still think, oh, if I get the newer phone, if I get this, and so you're like trying to find ways to get yourself happier with this. But when you recognize gifting and you go, oh, wait a minute, if I can get happier from someone else's happiness, now this target zone of joy in my life is gone from my own little bitty body to billions of opportunities. And so you practice it at Burning Man. You have 70,000 people and you're all like totally in it. And then when you get to really get that, then you go, oh, how can I practice this in my default world and in my relationships? Which is, I think, to pull it back to relationships and polyamory. I think that I'm always coming back to how do we view a relationship dynamic from that gifting place or non-transactional. Anytime you fall into transactional scorekeeping, you're doomed. But if you can go, oh, okay, how can I feel good about what I'm gifting to this person or these people, and how can I get joy from their joy? So I find it to be a transformative principle for almost all aspects of my life.
Yeah, gifting for me was very intuitive. That was one of the ones that initially made the most sense to me. And to me, gifting is also something that dovetails with decommodification and radical self-expression, which we've been talking about. Because the thing that I tell people, especially when I host virgin burners at our camp, because that's what we do, is I try to help them understand that anything that is happening at a burn, anything, any dance floor, any art piece, any bar, any cuddle lounge, anything that is happening at a burn is happening because some crazy burner decided it needed to happen and made it happen. There's no main stage, there's no set schedule, there's no one orchestrating from behind the scenes. It's literally the generosity and the free expression of the community that is creating the event.
Yeah, that was that. I used to be a greeter, and I loved, people, they're like, oh, I'm just here to check it out. I'm like, nope. Nope. There's me greeting you. This is you in 2 days. Like get your camp set up, and then there's no difference between you and anyone else here. And I think that's really significant. That also, I think, is a it ends up being a beautiful recipe for any sort of community when everybody feels some ownership. So like when I tell people, like my camp is about 100 people. It's called Pink Heart. We have huge pink shade and pink fur couches, and we serve vegan ice cream and ice water. But we're a high profile camp. We get a lot of traffic, and we require a lot of work from people that are going to camp with us. To produce what we do with 100 people, everyone's got to chip in. And I tell people, like, look, this will be my 23rd burn. And so if you want my advice, I would say the more that you feel like you helped create this, the more joy you will get all week long. Because there's so much different than going to the coolest party in the world than throwing the biggest party in the world or the coolest party in the world. And I think that duocracy vibe that you talked about, like everything here was done because somebody wanted it done, that when you start to see the world that way too, it really changes the any sort of feeling of helplessness or any like the tendency to get too much into blaming. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't feel helpless or feel blame, but you can also feel empowered. That in your home, in your neighborhood, and theoretically in the country, we live in a duocracy. You are allowed to say, I don't like the way things are, or they could be better. And so I'm going to step up and do it.
Yeah, as you were talking earlier about the permission giving and the magic that this community creates, it also came to mind to me that it is important to acknowledge the shadow that is present anywhere, because it is always with humans. And in particular, I'm thinking about how this sense of duocracy and this sense of permission and this sense of, if not you, who, intersects with our current historical moment around Black Lives Matter and around other people with less privilege finding their voice and finding that duocracy, I'm done with this, I'm speaking up kind of spirit, and kind of the complexities around all of that. Do you have any reflections to add?
I mean, the other thing that is and these are not well-formed thoughts, but that there is Black Rock City or the Burning Man community is a place where every effort is made to encourage and support those that are trying to make a difference. And the world isn't so supportive, the default world. And so I would hate to, as someone of significant privilege, I don't want to say life is a duocracy, make it sound like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like there is, and in the same way, I also don't want to pass off the responsibility of playing a support role to others who have not been encouraged to take on the world as a duocracy. I think as a white man, like I've always known, yeah, of course the world's a duocracy. White men is who get to change things and do things. That's what we do. And so, part of my current chapter is in recognizing that I have deep patterns in those beliefs, and there's deep cultural things about that of just that's, and trying to see, being able to see that is that's not the same for everyone, and that where the places where I would be better suited to ask, how can I help, dig your ditch, instead of saying like, here, who wants to help me make a project, because I definitely have that tendency to do that. And the this time in history is one where for me these things are not clear. I'm trying to find my way with some of this stuff, and feeling like I could help fix this. Go, wait, maybe I'm not the person who should fix this. Maybe I should be quiet and listen. So I think that was a lot of vague thoughts, and maybe I'm not being clear, but it's Burning Man is also struggling right now. Not struggling. I think they're taking on aspects of the systemic inequality of our world and our culture, and trying to acknowledge that it exists within this utopia. And that's a really difficult thing for people who have almost like a religious-like connection to this community, to have to like put on your big boy pants and your X-ray specs and go, okay, let's see it from other people's perspectives, and make sure that see the darkness in it. And it's almost like, when you're a kid and you think your parents are amazing, and then you get to a point you're like, oh crap, they're not perfect.
Right.
And it's like a real loss of innocence that I feel like the Burning Man community is going through right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of communities are, because I think, to me, when I look at how we got here, I see a lot of power and a lot of motive and a lot of intentionality behind sorting people, so that people could be categorized, so that people could be ranked, so you knew who was in charge, and a certain type of person got to be in charge. And we've been living that life for a long time, and no matter where you fall in that hierarchy, in that intersectional privilege, if you will, because all of us are a mix of privileged aspects and less privileged aspects, you've been impacted by it. That impact is different. How that impact can be healed, altered, reformed differs. But the piece to me that was so important, and was part of why I found Burning Man so liberating, is because I've pretty much always recognized that, and this is because of my experience as a childhood trauma survivor, abuse survivor to be more specific, and my work with people who are also childhood survivors, that there's a damage that's done to the person who is receiving that power, impact, abuse, limitation that is crippling, and deeply painful, and really rips people apart from themselves, apart from their own source of power in a way that is pervasive and toxic. However, to be the person on the other side who is consciously or unconsciously benefiting from having more power in that dynamic, that person is also damaged, because there is a way that you have to relate to the people who are less than you. Again, whether you're consciously aware of that less than or not doesn't matter. There's a way that the entrenched power dynamic that tells you as a white man, it's a duocracy, go make your magic, and tells me as someone who was raised as a white woman, your job is to support the white man doing his thing. They're different harms. And it also changes how we see each other. It changes how we're allowed to interact with each other. It changes the degree of safety that we feel around each other, because you can't have someone with more privilege and someone with less privilege coexisting in the same space in a truly authentic, vulnerable, deep way of relating. It's impossible. And so for me, those of us who carry more privilege, our work is to, as you're saying, put on the X-ray goggles and be willing to listen to someone else's experience that is different than ours, to be willing to take that deep breath and say, okay, I'm hearing this transgender person explain all of the ways that they have experienced pain at a burn. And there's a part of me that deeply wants to rise up and say, but wait, I found my ability to express myself as a genderqueer person at a burn. What are you talking about? But my experience isn't theirs. My experience of empowerment through burning does not diminish, take away, or negate their experience of harm at a burn. Both those narratives are real. Both of those narratives coexist. And so once we start to and the verb that I like from my country background is reckon. Because struggle is a little too negatively connotated, but reckoning to me, like that's in your soul. That's going deep. You're grappling with something that just changed how you see the world and your understanding of it. That is a really hard thing to do, to sit with it, to let it inform you, and to decide how you want to change. And the piece that I want people who look like us to understand is that the more that we can do that, the more that we can reckon with history and the power dynamics that some of our ancestors put in place, the more permission we will all have. The more defaultia can start to look more like a burn. The more it can be safe for someone who doesn't look like you to interact with you in that same open, authentic way that you and I both delight in every time we go to a burn. That's my soapbox.
So I don't want to get too dark, but one thing that I struggle with is that as you create things that are more and more ideal, they feel like they are so fragile, because it doesn't require more than a single person who is cruel and brutal. And that's, one of the struggles of, society through history. It's and I think that's one of the struggles that I have, like someone can have a terrible experience at Burning Man because there's, 1% of the people are cruel or racist or whatever. And I guess that's that's part of the reckoning, is that there is no light without darkness. And that's that's a tough one to because I think that the contrast of of going from a perspective of like the world is mostly fair, which is or to more and more, as you put the X-ray specs on, more and more evidence that, oh my gosh, there is so much inequality, so much oppression, so much corruption, so much it feels like it feels so daunting. Yeah, I guess that, so I mean, this is, and it's not, so what, to change gears slightly so that I don't get too depressed, and maybe I'll come back around. Like, one of the things that I did after I got super excited about gifting is I was looking for ways to do that in the default world. And so I helped start a homeless charity called First Saturdays, where once a month we go out and we gift to local houseless people. So we go out with care packs and clothes, and we just set up like a little street boutique, and we give things away. And it's an opportunity to just connect. But before we go out and do it, I meet with all the volunteers, and we have a big circle of love, I call it, and let them know that we're gifting. We're not, it's not, we figured we have the answers and you poor things. It's like, hey, we're like a theme camp. We're trying to give away mojitos, or in the same way that, like, we want to make you happy because it makes us happy. Mm-hmm. And so, that for me we've been doing it now 11 years every month. And it's such a beautiful practice for me, because it hits on some of these things about the daunting magnitude of the darkness. Like, if you go out to try to end homelessness or end hunger, then you end every day beaten. Mm-hmm. And you can't maintain that. You just can't. And so, like, almost every time we go out, a volunteer will be like, oh, we're almost out of sandwiches. And I'm like, oh, we're going to run out of sandwiches. Like, that's a given. Like, the goal here isn't to feed everyone, like, because they're going to be hungry. If we did, they'd want a sandwich tomorrow. And so instead of ending the day feeling like we failed at feeding everybody, every sandwich is a win. You go, sandwich, yes, win, 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 win. Every time you can look someone in the eyes and say, you're welcome, or thank you, win, 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 win. And then you can be like, okay. And today was a victorious effort. Mm-hmm. I think that same mentality is required. I'm speaking to myself now because I started to get a little depressed a minute ago, is needed in these cultural things, like, it can feel pretty daunting. But you can also go, oh, you know what? I did a little better today. I, recognize this. I noticed this thing happened. Look at all these wins. Mm-hmm. Let's focus on that and not this big thing that's looming.
I think a phrase that you threw at me earlier, direction, not distance, might be part of this conversation.
Exactly.
Observation.
Yeah. I that's one of I'm big on like sticky note mantra things, direction, not distance is one that, because if you get focused on cleaning all the trash, it's never enough, right. But if you go, oh, I'm picking up a piece of trash, that's a win. And it's important for service as well as almost anything in your, like, I think in life we get too caught up on the bigger, better, more in everything, this, when I was younger and I kind of was caught up and I wanted to be famous, and I had this real epiphany of like, the stadium is never full of enough people. You always want more people, more audience, more, unless you can go, wait a minute, somebody's dancing to my music. That's a win, like. And so if there's if what you're doing is in a direction that is true to who you are and what you value, then you're winning. Just keep taking little steps in that direction. And this is actually timely because I turn 50 tomorrow, and I've been really reflecting on my life. And I got hit yesterday. I just started weeping yesterday morning because I was like, whoa, I've been just taking tiny steps in a direction of trying to be more loving and trying to be more authentic and trying to just be true. And this, like, over 20 years, it ends up like touching a lot of people. And then those people end up touching a lot of people. And then those people end up touching a lot of people. And so I feel like 20 years ago when I was like, I want to be playing to an auditorium full of people, a big stadium. I'm like, whoa, I think it's touched a stadium full of people by now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's anytime, you're trying to do the right thing, direction, not distance is a way to keep you in a state of energized winning instead of oppressive, frustration.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that drive for bigger, better, badder, more is a reflection of the economy that we live in, the advertising that we're subjected to. And I would agree with you. It's I've been a social worker for 15 years professionally, working with trauma survivors and other people in pretty desperate situations. And it is absolutely that sandwich provided today, that moment in this session that client face lit up and they realized they could stop beating themselves up for something. Those are the pieces that I hold on to. And as you were talking about the smallness, in some ways, the practical smallness of those kinds of steps, and the sense of like this enormous darkness, what came to mind in my mind was an evening at Burning Man. I was sitting up on scaffolding at the time the sun was going down and started watching all the little lights, all these little tiny light bulbs all over the desert, just lighting up. One string of lights really isn't gonna matter in the pitch black darkness of Black Rock Desert. But when the whole city lights up, you can see for miles. And I think that, to me, is one of the best metaphors for the power that we do all have separately and together.
Yeah, and together, because the something I've been thinking about lately is that we are constantly have the ability to be giving permission to other people. I think that there's another one of my sticky note things, and actually on the side of my motorhome it says, "The world would rather hug you than hurt you." And I think that it's easy to forget that as you look at the news and you see conflict and so much division. But if you travel the world face to face and you avoid hot topic, political conversation, most people would rather invite you in their home and drink tea than argue with you. And I think that we all have the ability to be those activists of that vibe of, a smile and a good morning is like, that's enough. You are changing the world, because everybody you do that to now has one more example. Oh, it's okay. Oh, I can treat one another this way. I think that we underestimate the impact that we have in the tiny acts that we go through the world, because we've been convinced to be smaller, to be dimmer than who we really are. Mm-hmm. And so we all can be that permission giver to others.
Absolutely. And that is a great place for us to close today. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, John. I'm really glad we were able to connect.
Me too. Yeah, great to talk to you.
All right, everyone, thanks for joining us. And the links are below if you want to check out Hug Nation, check out Burning Man. I'd love to come across you.
Can I say one more thing, which is that one thing that I have learned that is if you are watching this, then there's a good chance that you are a human being and you're going through all sorts of the human experience and struggles and triumphs and pain and all that stuff. And so let me just say that I love you. Thank you for being in this crazy journey with us.